For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That was Ephesians 6:12. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. This is another installment of Thinking Well podcast. I'm Kyle.
I'm Tom.
What's going on, Tom?
Not a whole lot, Kyle.
How you been since the last 3 days I see you?
It's been a week, man. Just a lot of work stuff going on, but I mean, God's good. He brings us through.
Good, man.
It's the weekend.
How's that going? How's work thing go? Without getting too much into it.
No, it's still kind of a up in the air kind of thing. There's a lot of reassurances, but I was telling somebody the other day just kind of my plans for things and where I see things going. So the Lord manages to work stuff out the way they need to work out. So
absolutely. I'm definitely praying for you in that.
I appreciate that.
Peace, smooth transition,
How's your week been?
Less busy than usual. Yeah, it was busy kind of like during the start, and then we had one of our potential franchise partners in for a Discovery Day. So it was kind of a big production in the beginning of the week, kind of hosting them in our office and, showing them stores and questions and like that, presentations. But after that, it's just kind of pretty easy after that compared. But no, it's been a good week.
Cool, man.
Looking forward to the weekend and Sunday morning worship.
Yeah.
But
always.
Well, let's jump into it. So this week we have I think I would categorize this as a current event, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Last one we did was quite a while ago, so we definitely wanted to kind of circle back to one. So we're going to be talking about the UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, if you're not familiar with that term.
Love it.
I kind of subscribe to the old school like UFO. That's just kind of, I like that one better.
UAP just sounds like the government literally came up with it.
Yeah. Well, they kind of did.
I know.
Yeah, it's kind of exactly.
But it literally sounds like it too.
Yeah, UFO just sounds like an actual, it just sounds more authentic to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, something about it. Anyway, but we want to kind of dive into the congressional hearing in regards to the UFOs and UAPs. Talk about, what that means, what exactly transpired. And then more so, as Christians, I think it's important for us to be able to articulate a response to things that happen like this in our country and around the world. So we'd love to take you through that, maybe expose you to some viewpoints and some thoughts maybe you didn't think about. But it's very interesting topic, to say the least.
It is. And we were talking about before, and I think I want to preface it for our listeners. Like, this is not, we're not going to sit here and have a conversation about whether or not aliens exist and all that kind of stuff, or get really deep into what the Bible says about aliens. We kind of want to just discuss the current thing that's going on, just present some thoughts and some conversation on it, because Kyle said again before we started, like I think you're right. I don't think a lot of people know about this stuff or care to know about this stuff or care to be involved in this kind of stuff. So,
well, what's funny about it is when you think about what the media is saying, or even what Congress is saying, or our government is. Yeah. People are saying that they're admitting to these things existing, and everyday Americans are just like, yeah, whatever, which kind of speaks to like how just not trusted the U.S. government is at this point, which is just kind of humorous to me. Right. That like the government is basically admitting that UFOs are quote unquote real, and people are like, meh, like whatever. Yeah. It's kind of funny to me.
It's just the government's opinion.
Okay.
Right? Well, and a lot of people too have become apathetic to it, right? Like it doesn't really matter to us what the government says anymore.
Right.
It's just something that's going on in a place that doesn't concern me. But I mean, y'all, it concerns us.
Oh, absolutely.
Because what they are, they're mindsets that are being put in place, and I think we need to be aware of it. So, I mean, there was a congressional hearing. It was widely watched. We've got a couple of sources here in front of us. One of them is from News Nation. It's an article written by Stephanie Whiteside. It really just goes in and describes what happened, the things that were said. they're calling him a whistleblower, right? Which I love the fact that they're calling him a whistleblower, because in giving him the name whistleblower, they're immediately lending credibility to what he's saying.
Right.
Because whistleblowers don't come out and tell you made up stories. Whistleblowers come out and tell you the dirty, dark truth of something that's happening inside of a corporation or some kind of public entity. So immediately by calling him that, they're giving everything he says credibility.
No, absolutely. And I didn't quite pick up on that when I first started hearing about it, but it definitely has been pushed to you primarily through a lens, very specific lens to begin with, that, hey, whatever this guy's saying is truth.
Right.
And we should all accept it. And I think it's a very dangerous preposition, to be a part of. I don't know exactly what's all happening here, right?
Right.
And I don't think anybody does.
Oh.
But it's definitely interesting. The hearings really revolve around, well, I believe it's three people. David Gersh, David Fravor, and I believe Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, and then there's and then Ryan Reeves as well, or Graves. I'm sorry, not Reeves. That would be your dad.
I was like, whoa.
No, Ryan Graves. That's correct.
Ryan Graves. That is also correct.
And these are all former military people, every one of them.
Right. Yeah, ranging from people in power, right? You have commanders and such. You have pilots of aircrafts who claim they've seen like eyewitness testimony, like firsthand testimony, which is interesting. I kind of wanted to get into that maybe before we get a little bit further, because I believe that human beings, being the way that we operate, we are very psychosomatic. I believe that we have every capability of witnessing unnatural, supernatural, unexplainable things. No way around it, right? Which I don't know how you experience things like that and don't say, oh, there is another realm of spiritual warfare beings that are all around us. I don't know how you don't get to there, but I think people will try to pervert everything they can. So, they claim to be able to see that they in the hearing they call it these tic-tac objects.
Yeah. This is specifically about a recording that was made where you see they call it a tic-tac object because it's this little white ovally looking thing that it looks like a tic-tac, but it's quite a bit larger than a tic-tac based on the viewpoint of where the image is coming from. I mean, this thing we're sitting in a room that's probably 12 by 12, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And this thing is definitely larger than this room based on just the topography around it and all that kind of stuff, right? So this thing, it's pretty massive, and it's moving in 90-degree angles and things like that. And this is the thing that they're discussing. Right.
Or just the velocity in which it's moving and changing direction. Things that theoretically we don't have, and any world power didn't have the capability. But I think it's an important distinction. Again, I wasn't in the cockpit. I wasn't, on that ship that night. I don't know exactly what was happening. But don't be naive, listeners, to think that there is not a spiritual realm that doesn't interact with ours. There absolutely is. And, that coupled up with us being psychosomatic beings, I think a lot of this can be explained. And I'll kind of leave it at that. I don't want to get too far into the logistics of it.
So I'll go down that rabbit hole briefly.
Let's do it.
Because I was thinking about it today. And what I think is really interesting, as human beings, when we look into the clouds, right, your mind is immediately looking for familiar shapes in the clouds. That's why when you even as a child, you're looking at clouds and you're like, oh, that looks like a horsey, and oh, that one over there looks like the ears of a bunny rabbit, and things like that, right? So we're looking for patterns, familiar patterns in things that we see. I mean, basically from the time that we can imagine things, right? And that's programmed into us to find those familiarities. That's just how God designed us.
To associate,
Yeah. And so there's that I think we need to take into consideration, because I mean, you talk about science fiction, right? I'm a huge science fiction nerd, but it's been around for a long, long time. And so we've made these things familiar to the general public. So when we see something that's an unexplained phenomenon, because our brains can't associate that to anything known to us, well, then it's the unknown. It's the unidentified flying object, right? And then there's a whole nother aspect of that really does tie into our episode last week or today about creation and things like that and evolution, where we've gone so far from wanting to believe in a creator that it couldn't possibly be something spiritual. It has to be something that's beyond our imagination currently,
otherworldly,
but it's otherworldly, not necessarily supernatural.
Right.
It can't be supernatural, because if it is supernatural, then that means there's something that is supernatural. And if we admit that there's something that's supernatural, then we may have to admit that there's a God. So there has to be a logical extraterrestrial, even if it's not terrestrial, basis for why this would exist. And we're just rationalizing it. It's familiar. It can't be supernatural. It must be aliens. It must be something that we can't identify.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's very dangerous to just immediately jump to the extraterrestrial argument or just that mindset, right? That was, I guess, kind of the point I was trying to make is there's other things happening, and the more plausible way of thinking is that you have to accept the spiritual realm. You have to.
Right.
Because it's there. It's there, ladies and gentlemen. But so getting back into this hearing a little bit, we have the Tic Tac UFO that they were talking about pilot Ryan Graves who witnessed it. There's another like black sphere floating inside a clear cube was another one of these things.
Yeah.
Kind of a weird description. But what's interesting about this is part of this hearing was directed at the U.S. government,
right?
For one, to disclose information, and two, to prepare the soldiers, especially on the East Coast, with better training to how to handle these UAPs.
Right.
Which is interesting because that takes a lot of legwork to implement. So now we're having arguments for new, SOPs, standard operating procedures for pilots based off of what's happening here.
Yeah.
So this is why it's important, ladies and gentlemen, because it is directly affecting change in our U.S. military.
Well, and again, that whole whistleblower concept, right? And he's claiming that the government has known about this stuff. Well, one of the things I thought was really interesting in the article, and I'll quote it, quote, his claim that the government, specifically the Department of Defense, is operating programs to retrieve material from crashes that are extraterrestrial in nature, end quote. And then he goes on to say that they're just covering all this stuff up and they're not telling anybody, but they're getting all this alien technology off of these UAP and UFOs, and that we should be using that technology, to what you were saying, Kyle, to equip and build and have things that can combat these types of things.
Right.
Which is just mind-blowing that, number one, somebody came out and said that. But number two, that there's the legitimate possibility that the U.S. government, not necessarily grabbing materials off of unidentified flying objects, right? But that they have a division that is developing technology that is specifically being designed to combat these type of threats. That's your tax dollars at work, Kyle.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I don't know if you enjoy that, but that's fun.
I think it's super cool.
That's fun, I guess. That's cool. But
give me a microwave gun. How does that work?
Well, the thing is, it's interesting, right? Because I completely agree, and I completely, I would say that the U.S. government is decades ahead of what the technology we have now. So I believe that there are secret facilities. Secret just meaning that they're just not disclosed to the public because we don't want people seeing what happens inside of them. But a lot of those are just new flying systems, new weapon systems. You know, these are where these things, these black sites are where this stuff happens. And I think you'd be naive to think that the U.S. government or any superpower isn't developing weapons, vehicles of all kinds that aren't 30, 40, 50 years ahead of what we have now to the public. The best example of that is like cell phone technology in the late 70s and early 80s. You know, they were walking around with that kind of cell phone technology that we didn't see as in the public until like the late 90s. So,
and I mean, they were massive, right? But they worked.
And they worked. So that's just kind of an example, but it's happening, right? And that's where I think you get like your Area 51, right? Like, I don't think there's flying saucers flying around in southern Nevada.
Right.
It's probably experimental stealth military aircraft. And what that looks like in 30 years probably looks like a UFO. Probably. That's probably what you're seeing. Didn't mean to get off on that tangent.
No, you're good, because I think it's important to note that, right? Because from a governmental perspective, the more things you hide, the more you're going to stir up conversations and conspiracy theories and things like that. So I guess that's an argument for more transparency from our government. Like, are you really spending $25,000 on a toilet seat? No.
Yeah.
But just tell us where the $25,000 is going. If it's going to make WD-40, which was discovered as they were trying to find water displacement chemicals to keep off of the space shuttle. That was water displacement formula 40. That's what WD-40 stands for. So if you're using it to make that kind of stuff, just let us know. Like, that's cool. WD-40 benefits a lot of people.
Yeah, that's way cooler than quote unquote misplacing $6 billion,
right,
or whatever the number is, right? I'd rather you just tell me that you're using it for, whatever.
R&D.
That's all I need to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of moving on here. So within this hearing, right, we also have another publication here by Smithsonian Magazine, article written by Margaret Osborne. So she kind of goes into the Smithsonian lens on the world here and looking at some of the topics and subject matters researched, by that institution, the Smithsonian. There's a lot of talk, and I believe this is her quoted here, but it says, "I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access."
Yeah, that's what Grosh said.
That was Grosh. That's right. So they're claiming that the U.S. government has not only been hiding the existence of these things, but also that they have crashed and they have retrieved like bio or organics from them.
Right.
Which is just, straight out of like a science fiction movie. And this is happening last 2 weeks ago in your U.S. government, people.
Right. Well, and it goes on. It talks quite a bit about how Congress determines that there needs to be some planning that gets into place. But a lot of the really interesting things is no one that was there, Grush, the Navy commander, the couple of Navy pilots that were there to testify, no one could present any evidence.
Right.
Not one person. And when Grush was asked directly about it, he's like, "I'm unable to procure evidence in this public setting because of the classified nature of the evidence." Right? Well, that's super convenient.
Yeah. Why be there and testifying to Congress if you can't back up what you're saying? And wouldn't that just lead credency to okay, then because you're saying outlandish things and the burden of proof is on you.
Yeah.
But you're hiding behind classified information? Come on.
Well, and you look at all these other whistleblowers historically, right? They've come in with data sets. They've come in with like financial records. They've come in with all kinds of different proofs that what they're saying, they have reams and reams of documents that, hey, this is what happened. This is what we did. And you've got this guy saying, I can't tell you because it's classified, but trust me, it exists. And we're giving him the credibility. I mean, those were just 2 national publications from reputable news sources that spent the time and assigned a reporter to report on this stuff and write articles about this stuff. And that was 2 out of the thousands and thousands of hits that I got.
Right. With no evidence whatsoever.
0 evidence. And there's quotes in here that are where there's a scientist that's talking about with billions and trillions of planets out there, how can Earth be the only one that has intelligent life? Well, again, this goes back to our last podcast on creation versus evolution, right? In order to believe that other planets are capable of growing and evolving life, you have to believe in evolution and that's how we got here. But if you believe in creation, that's not, you can't get there. If it were true, we'd know.
No,
there'd be a record of it.
That's always been my biggest contention with it. I believe somewhere in Genesis 1. I mean, there's other places as well, but I mean, the creation account, I mean, there would have been some kind of reference, some kind of indication of something else. But it's very clear, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it's just, you have to, it's a stretch to get there. And I get it, folks, I get it, right? It's an exciting topic. It's interesting, right? Something else I wanted to touch on, and kind of in this vein is, I mean, it's exciting because the media for the last 100+ years has been making these, ET movies.
Yeah.
And they're fun. It's a fun topic, right? The possibility of this. But folks, I mean, you have to look at it for what it is. It is science fiction.
Yeah.
And it's fun, right? There's nothing wrong with it.
For sure.
It's super fun, but it has no basis, I don't think, in reality and or in the Bible.
And I'm a huge Star Wars and Star Trek fan, right? And I love watching that stuff and like seeing all the cool aliens they come up with and like all the planets and stuff like that.
Binks,
yeah, and all these individual cultures that evolve. And every single show you watch or movie that you watch that has anything to do with aliens will say something about how they evolved and all this kind of stuff. And this civilization evolved, and we need to go where no person has gone before and find all these different lives and different civilizations. Well, Christ came to save humankind.
Right.
If God had created all of these other aliens, or if there were all of these other aliens, then there would have to be a salvation plan for each and every one of them. I can't get there. I don't have my Bible memorized, but I can't get there. Where I can get is where you were touching on earlier, Kyle.
Is what?
On the supernatural.
No, absolutely. You have to embrace it, and I think I'll let you go into it. I think it explains more of the question marks that we find in our day-to-day life in this reality, this 3D reality that we occupy. I think you'd be surprised at how many questions are answered by spiritual powers that one can't see all the time. Sometimes I think we can, and I think that we can't necessarily see them all the time, but we definitely feel it, and we definitely interact with them daily. I mean, they're there.
I think when you look at it, if Satan can appear as an angel of light, so if the great deceiver can present himself as a being that would herald truth, how difficult do you think it would be for the other fallen angels, which are what demons are, right?
Right.
How difficult would it be for other fallen angels to impersonate anything? if Satan can impersonate an angel of God, couldn't fallen angels impersonate people, animals, aliens?
Yeah, or whatever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
orbs of light, tic-tac objects, right? Anything to distract you and pull you away
Yep.
from the existence of your creator. Anything to distract you. Why wouldn't Satan use anything? If you're an F-18 pilot and you're flying around and that's your world and you're inundated in your aircraft and your emissions all the time, why wouldn't he put something like that?
Sure.
Why, I mean, what you tell me, listener, what would be the most effective tool for someone like that? To steer them, oh yeah, definitely saw something I can't explain. I agree with that. 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
I can't explain that either. But here, I'll slide a Bible over to you. You show me where the aliens are, and we can keep talking about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's an important distinction. You know, the devil will, in any facet of your life, right? Wherever he can attack you and be the most effective, he will.
Well, and I think I'm gonna make two statements here, and they're gonna seem a little contradictory. When it comes to power and knowledge, sometimes we give Satan too much credibility. On the flip side of that, because he's not as powerful as God, he's not all knowing. Like, what he knows is the same thing that we know in the Bible. And he knows that in the end he loses. But misery and evil love company.
Right.
So he's doing all the work that he can in this world to bring as many people into the lake of fire with him. If Satan doesn't know how to do anything else, the Bible tells us that he is a fantastic liar. He is the father of lies. He was able to talk Eve into believing that God lied to her. So he's the father of lies. And if he can talk Eve, who had no basis of knowing anything but God,
Right.
into believing that God was a liar, why couldn't he have started knowing that in the end he was going to lose, weaving a narrative that supports his mission? As far back as you can go. Because I think to myself, you've got all these unexplained hieroglyphics and different civilizations in the past that have like these unexplainable pictures and things on cave walls that we can't associate anything to.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do we really think this is something new? That we're coming into this knowledge in the last two or three centuries just because it hasn't been around the whole time? If we're blind to the fact that Satan can weave a story, and it is a story, Satan weaves a story, the Bible tells his story.
Right.
But yeah, I think when you look, you find plenty of evidence that there's this narrative that's started being woven long before you and I were here. The question is, where is it going? What's the purpose of it?
Right. You know, it's an interesting thought, right? I mean, yeah, it's been around for as long as humans been around. And I think that as humans, we've always looked up towards the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, they're amazing, right? They reflect the majesty of the Creator.
Right.
And again, I think you'd be naive to think that the devil hasn't used that, the curiosity inside of us as humans, looking up at the stars, for manipulative purposes, right? I mean, that is 100% in line with the character of Satan. Absolutely. But no, you bring up a great point, right? What does this mean going forward? And, you know, I don't want to get too far into conspiracies here, but I think I have biblical reasoning that supports me on this one here. Tribulation begins with the rapture.
Yep.
Okay. So in an instant, right, the trumpet of the Lord is sound. The Lord takes up the believers in an instant. Gone. Right. We don't know how many. I would safe bets over 1 billion. I don't know. Right.
Probably a pretty safe number.
Pretty safe. 1 to 2 billion people.
We'll probably be surprised how many it actually is,
Right.
as far as from a large numerical value. But yeah, I think I would say a
living
billion.
people on the earth at that time.
You're talking about 1/8 of the world's population, 1/7 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just say a billion people, right? Billion people gone in an instant. We also know that during the tribulation, the governments of the world are going to unify, and that's where you get like the mark of the beast. That's where you get the Antichrist appears from Northern Europe to try to just rule necessarily over what's left of the world.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better positioning to say, hey, world, we just lost 1/8 of our people. Like, we can't explain why, right? They're instantly gone. But, oh, wait, we've been telling you about UAPs for the last 20, 30, 50, who knows? I mean, they might come back. He might come back tomorrow, whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
And it might be 500 years from now. Lord, if it's in your will, don't tarry that long.
Yeah, it'd be great. Maybe next week. Whatever.
Right now, let's go.
Let's get it done. Anyway, but, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's very plausible to think that the world has to have some kind of explanation presented to the populace about what happened. And I think that on that big of a scale, I think it's quite plausible. And we don't know, right?
No, we don't know.
But I think it's plausible that the government or governments of the world will say, yeah, it's extraterrestrials, and they abducted a billion people, and then we've been trying to tell you, and you guys weren't listening. Here, why don't you didn't listen to us about this? Listen to us about this, because people will believe it. They will be deceived, and they will believe it, and there will be, billions of people who band together, probably for the first time ever, under this corrupt, evil government that ultimately is going to war against the Savior. And I think, like I said, I think it's quite plausible. We don't know, right? It's speculative, but what else? What else could there be without maybe war or something else happening to explain? I don't know how else you explain 1 billion plus people,
right? And you look at the groundwork that's being laid, right? Like specifically, and this isn't the first time, by the way, that Congress has gotten together and debated on alien things and artifacts and the existence of aliens and things like that. I was looking, and I think there's been two. This is one of two recently within the last 10 years, but further back it was 1966 or something like that.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But regardless, so you think about it, if one of the first recorded ones was back in 1966, and then within the last 10 to 15 years, there's been two, you're already looking at escalation. So there's this groundwork that's being laid. There's this seed that's being planted now in modern society that this is, like you said, maybe it's not the thing, but it could be a plausible explanation that could be used.
Right.
A billion people are gone. Well, listen, you didn't know this because we've been trying to keep it from you for the sake of
national security,
and we didn't want to create a worldwide panic, but there's this data that we've been collecting over the last 150 whatever years, and it's all pointed to the fact that this was going to happen. And all of a sudden you can present all these manufactured documents and all this reasoning and this person steps up and says, hey, this is an earth problem. This is a national problem. This is an earth problem. We are the people of the earth, and we need to band together against this global threat. I'm in. Protect me from the oppressor that is coming from outer space that just took a billion people off of the planet.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I can't think of a better explanation of how that'll go down. Mm-hmm. And you're referring to the Antichrist, right? Coming up and uniting the world's nations, right? I think that could be definitely plausible. What they pin it on, right? It would definitely seem like they're laying the foundations, if that is true. All speculative.
Yeah, this isn't eschatology. This is us
Right.
sitting here. We're hypothesizing based on current events, right?
But we do know that X, Y, and Z have to happen, right?
Right.
There's going to be a billion plus people removed from the earth in an instant. We know that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the world is going to form, a quote unquote like one world government, and we know that the Antichrist is going to appear from Europe-ish to come and rule it.
Yeah.
We know those three things are going to happen in that order. So we have to look at it and say, okay, if we know that's going to happen, how do we get there? And we don't have to, but it's interesting to think about. I don't necessarily care. I'll be gone. Right. So it doesn't really matter to me, but it's interesting to think about, because I think if they are laying foundations of what they might pin that on, this may be what that looks like. Right. And I wouldn't be, and you kind of mentioned it, but you're talking one or two in the 60s or 70s, and now we're having two more. And I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes more of a frequent matter that we see in the media.
Well, you've got the Space Force now, right? So there could be an argument made for kind of throwing some more funding at that. And if we need to protect our global border, well, okay, we need to beef this up a little bit. And one thing, and Kyle, I know we had talked about the other aspect of this, right? Like, how do you get to a one world like religion in the light of that, right?
Right.
Well, there's
Scientology. They finally,
they finally made
get us all.
it. Yeah. And maybe it's not a one world religion thing, but there was a super interesting portion of a podcast and portion of an interview that Kyle sent to me. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Are we ready to do that?
Yeah, I want to play a clip.
Yeah.
And to give you some context, I think this is a good kind of segue here. Knowing what's going to happen after the rapture, right? The message is going to be, hey, we need to unify as a people,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to be one people because we've suffered this massive loss, or whatever they say, right?
Yeah.
But the purpose will be, hey, we need to come together as one person, right? One people group, the humans, right? And the reason why this is a segue is, and I'll play this clip here in a second, but if you've done any research or any kind of just messing around in this UFO, UAP field, at some point you're going to run into Stephen Greer. He's a UFOologist. Didn't know that was a thing until today. But studies UFOs and has for a while. He's been around since the 60s doing it. A lot of published works. And in his latest film called First Encounters of the Fifth Kind, clever, he goes through some interesting topics, which I think are relevant. And I hope this gives some credence to our listeners of kind of what's really happening behind the scenes here.
Yeah.
So this clip here is from an interview with him, kind of explaining what exactly they're trying to do in communicating. And yes, you heard me, communicating with these extraterrestrials. Take a listen.
What we're doing are involving a specific project, a diplomatic project, using advanced concepts in higher consciousness to communicate with extraterrestrial biological entities from other star systems. There are beings from higher dimensions, celestial, angelic, what have you, which also assists with that at times, but that's very different from an ET civilization.
Insane.
I mean, that it's pretty blatant, right? I mean, I don't know if he meant to say that, but I think it's definitely the truth of his whole position. They are teaching people, and it's called CE5 communication. It has a name. I don't know what it stands for. But in this film, and one of the things that Mr. Greer is propagating is how to communicate effectively with these ETs, extraterrestrials. And he goes on in his film to promote reaching a higher, I'm quoting him, reaching a higher level of meditation and he grants that yes, you will run into these other quote unquote other spiritual beings in the process. We have seen that. He says we have witnessed this, but they'll help you, they'll aid you in finding these higher beings,
physical beings
in their consciousness. Yeah. And we're like, whoa! Like when I heard this the other day, I had to pause it and just like sit alone for a second. I was like, did he really just say that?
Shake it off a little bit.
I was like, what in the world?
Yeah.
They are admitting the spiritual realm, and they're saying that they're helping you find this higher form of consciousness, meditation, whatever you want to call it, in the efforts of talking to aliens.
Yeah. And
it's, folks, I mean, there's a reason why I don't watch certain kind of movies. There's a reason why I don't mess around with seances or Ouija boards, or I don't open my heart up to stuff like that, because it's so dangerous. This is exactly the same thing. Exactly.
And he even says that they use, like, he's promoting seances to use as a tool to communicate with these otherworldly physical beings. It's so strange that. So it's a peaceful movement, right? Their goal is peace on Earth, and we all need to be peaceful so that the aliens will be more interested in us.
Well, that was kind of the segue that I was making. Is later in the world history, after we're gone, the message is, hey, we need to unify together. We've lost billions of people. We need to unify together and figure this thing out. That's also what is being propagated now. Hey, we need to form together. We need to stop the wars. We need to be more peaceful. We need to come together, which I'm all for. Obviously, I'm not for, really any unnecessary wars or any violence. I'm not saying I am, but it's the same message. Hey, we need to come together as a world being, a world people, to communicate with these extraterrestrials from a different planet. That and some of the stuff that he says is pretty crazy on like the modes of communication. Mm-hmm. Is like I don't know if I can even articulate it because it doesn't make sense, ladies and gentlemen, but he was saying that like they communicate on such a higher level of consciousness that they are able to interface with our brain or our technology, which is like, okay, well, where's the evidence in that? Like, what are you saying?
Well, because if extraterrestrials do exist, they would obviously be much smarter than us,
right? Because
they evolved way before we did. So obviously, because we came from primates, we can't possibly be as intelligent as they are. We are the epitome of creation. Like when God created us, he was done, and he said, it is very good.
Right.
There is no higher physical being other than, I mean, Jesus Christ was a higher physical being, but what made him a higher physical being is that he was 100% a physical being and 100% a supernatural being. But there is no other higher physical being. And the argument that if extraterrestrials are out there, they're obviously so much smarter than us, it's directly opposed to humanism. Like, you can't be a humanist and then believe in ET.
Well, yeah, and you're just bending your own ideology to just fit this extreme notion that we're not alone. And I get it. I can understand. I can place myself like, this is exciting, so I will do anything I can to believe the obvious lie or just what I've been told, what's been in the media. It's interesting. I'll give you that, but at a certain point, you got to sit down and say, okay, this is reality and this is fiction.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, where we're going with this is there is a real spiritual realm
absolutely
that you can absolutely interact with. And I'll tell you this, more times than not, what you're interacting with is demonic. And I think Stephen Greer is unfortunately promoting this kind of ideology. Hey, we're gonna show people, we're gonna tell people what's worked for us in contacting these demons that we're gonna call aliens, because God forbid that we talk about a spiritual realm that leads to some kind of conversation of the existence of a creator,
yeah,
it has to be. We talked about it. It has to be aliens, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to teach the younger generation, primarily is who's doing this, how to communicate and have these quote unquote assistants from the spiritual realm that they even say it exists. Ladies and gentlemen, it's so dangerous. You are provoking demons.
I'll go even further to say that it's downright evil. Like, we are promoting evil when we say, so if it's not funny, it's unfortunate to me, but so horror movie, any horror movie I've ever seen that contains a demon or a demon influence in it, evil, the demon, when you see it, it either disfigures a human being or it looks like a disfigured human being, and it looks alien. And then you look at the pictures of aliens and they're mostly humanoid. They're warped, twisted, molded, malleable versions of what a human being would look like. And when you compare the two, the lighting may be different, but the way that the human form is altered to depict either demonic or alien are the same concepts. Why do we think that is? And I have news for everybody. If you were to actually see a demon, if you were capable of doing that, I think we'd all be very surprised to find that they don't look too much different than we do. But they can adapt to different forms.
What goes back to what I was saying, right? If they have the ability, right? If they have the choice to and they have the ability, they will encounter you if you let them, right? And this is exactly what we're talking about. If you open yourself up to that kind of demonic activity, they very well might have the power to influence you in a way where it's going to be most effective.
Yeah.
Where it's not going to look like some, little girl with walking backwards on her back or whatever, down some stairs or whatever it is. It's going to look appealing. And that's when they do the most damage.
Yeah.
And I think, especially as Christians, but, as just people, you have to be very careful with how we interact with, with things that are straight, like, gateways to the heart and the mind. And I got to say, these seances, I put them right up to Ouija boards, right up the same avenue. Ouija boards, or even worse. I mean, like, you are calling a demon on the phone.
Pretty much.
That's what's happening. You're FaceTiming a demon. And I think that is the way that I would formulate my articulate response to something like this, right? That was kind of the whole point of this, right? This is what's happening in our government. This is what's actually happening behind the scenes. Hopefully we've been able to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, right? And say, hey, think about this through a Christian lens, please, because it's so much damage can come of this.
There are principalities in the air. You look at the sightings that have taken place. You look at the narrative that's being constructed from these things, and the narrative that's been constructed over hundreds and hundreds of years when you go back and look at some of these things that have been placed, and I believe strategically. But there's demonic forces at work, and from a very humanistic standpoint, it's easy to look out into the stars and believe that we're not alone, because as human beings, the way that we were designed, we understand. God put it in us to understand that we're not alone.
Right.
But the place that we're not alone is that God is out there. It's not some kind of extraterrestrial. It's not an alien. God is out there. And with God comes a supernatural realm. And in that supernatural realm, there are demons. and there are angelic beings, and God is the master of it all. He is the one in control. He was the one that will have the final say and the final victory. But that does not take away from these demonic forces trying to cloud our judgment, trying to pollute our knowledge. I think back to the tagline of the X-Files, right? The truth is out there. I couldn't agree more. The problem is that they didn't capitalize the word truth, because the truth is out there. We find it in God's word, and we find it in the person of the God-man, Jesus Christ, who said that he was the way, the truth, and the light. We don't need to look out there into the stars and think to ourselves, there has to be a greater being, a more intelligent being out there, and try to explain that with an alien.
You know what looking at the stars should tell you, especially as a Christian? You know what it should tell you when you look out there, when you look at these, the James Webb telescope or even Hubble before it, when you're seeing these photographs that are mind-blowingly large, you can't even comprehend, right? There's, I forget what it's called, but it was like, it looked like just a ton of little stars, right? Like little white dots. Like someone had like a black sheet and there's a light behind it. Someone just poked a whole bunch of little holes in it. And they're like, every single one of those is a galaxy.
Yeah.
With hundreds of millions of stars, and it's, and presumably planets. My point is this: when you look at pictures like that, when you look at some of these structures that are way out in deep space that we've found, for example, like the pillars of creation, or things out there that have design to them, that we look at and say, wow, like this looks amazing. There's nothing else out there other than the splendor of the Creator.
Yeah. Amen.
Of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. The
reason that even that we have the capability of seeing these things is a gift, and we're taking it for granted.
Yeah.
We're able to look at some of the most, don't get me wrong, the Earth is beautiful, right? Theirs is probably the most beautiful planet there is, but there's some stuff out there that you look at, and it proves the Creator, the majesty, the splendor, the scope.
Yeah.
And that is why it's there, right? Because that was a question that I had, kind of, and we'll talk about it coming up. I think we have a couple of testimony episodes coming up for you guys of me and Tom, but it was one of the questions that I had to ask myself when it was really like this come to Jesus, like making the faith my own kind of thing, was, okay, God created it all, or Jesus created it all. Why is there so much? Right? And if we are truly the only, beings like this, why? Why is there 100 billion galaxies in this picture? Right? Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of an ignorant question, because it doesn't have to be that complicated. Why are you looking for something else?
Yeah.
It exists to point to the Creator and how wonderful, how exquisite it all is. And he says that he loves you more than that.
Yeah.
That's why it exists.
And how awesome of our God to continually allow us to see these things differently, to see them more accurately, to look at them and say, 1,000 years ago, we could have never known that God created this. And now we can see that he created it, and we wonder at it, and we marvel at the splendor of something that he's created that's not even for our immediate benefit. But as we continue to develop our technology and we can see further and we continually learn these new things about what God created, it speaks to an eternity where we're going to consistently, daily, till forever, find out more and more things about God that we didn't know before. When we look at the stars and we see those things, that's just a glimpse of the wonderment we're going to experience in eternity as Christians. I don't need to explain why to your point, why there are billions of galaxies that I can see in this little, $50 size picture. We don't, to your point, we just need to accept that God created it for proof to us that he's bigger than we are.
Well, absolutely, right? I mean, it's one of those things where as time goes on, and if the Lord tarries, I would imagine that our capability to see further and more of a high definition will get better and better. But all that is just for the purpose of displaying his power, and the creation. It's all it is.
Yeah.
That we would be awestruck. That would be truly awesome. I think as definitely like Westerners, we say awesome a lot, and we don't really mean it in the true sense. But like when I look at that picture or some of these things that are out there, I don't even know what they're called, right? Just these bodies of whatever, right? And they're massive. Some of the things that we find, that is the true sense of awesome. That's what that is.
Yeah.
That is the wonder, the awesome. That is the glory. I mean, just a glimpse, a fraction of a glimpse of the glory of God.
Yeah.
And that's why it's out there.
And as we look at those things, I think my final thought would be aliens. When you look at the reports, we need to look at them with a Christian worldview, acknowledging that while there's no supporting evidence for aliens in the Bible, there is supporting evidence for how demonic powers work in this world to confuse and pollute the knowledge that people have about an almighty creator. And these type of things support the exact opposite of a creator. So if the demonic forces out there can use whatever means they have at their disposal to propagate the things that will prove the truth of God to look like lies, sure, they're going to do it. And if Satan and his armies figure out that that's something that works, I would argue that they have. Why wouldn't you continually use it? So I think to the whole point of the conversation, yeah, I think we're going to see an escalation to it. I think that if it works, and maybe 10 years from now this doesn't work, so Satan changes tactics because he doesn't know today. This is the beautiful thing about God's knowledge and Satan's knowledge. Satan doesn't know today that 10 years from now this isn't going to work.
Right.
But God does. And 10 years from now, Satan's creative enough to come up with something else. But this may be what he's using right now to set up what he needs to set up. And God could change the circumstances to where that doesn't work. But I personally see this as something that he could use.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And we talked about the scope of it, right?
Yeah.
This is why it's important, Christian. What happens in our government is important if you live here in the United States and anywhere you live. What's happening in your country will eventually affect you. And we are very blessed here in the United States to not really face any like specific persecution.
Yeah.
But as these things become more apparent by our government, and there's more corruption, and there's more just entropy as we get closer to the rapture, Lord coming back, I think with that, it's going to become an escalation with persecution as well. And
for sure,
Christian, you need to be ready to be able to respond to these things. And, not only just to kind of, dissect what you see and be able to understand it, but you need to also be able to talk to your unsaved brothers and sisters about what is happening, right? Someone approaches you and says, yeah, I believe in UFOs and stuff. And yeah, they just had this hearing. They just basically admitted they had them and whatever. How are you going to respond to that?
Yeah.
Right. It's in public forum. So we think it's important for as Christians to have an articulate response to it. And then there's that. And then, really, I really hope that we were able to navigate through that and be able to explain our opinions on what we think these things are. But I think there's pretty strong evidence that they lie in the spiritual realm. And in that context, You have to be very careful, very, very careful. But, I think it was a great discussion.
No, for sure. And there are all kinds of resources. I'll tell our listeners, there are all kinds of resources out there that you can look up, what does the Bible say about aliens, or what are proofs in the Bible that there aren't aliens. Look that kind of stuff up. There's a lot of different things about creation and salvation specifically that are general proofs that aliens can exist, but that demonic forces are real.
Or email us. Email us a question. Our questions, I think, what I'd like to do is maybe carve out a couple weeks and just go through like a Q&A for some of the questions we have once we've accumulated enough. But if anyone has any extra thoughts, anything that you guys think that we didn't quite, wrap around and really encompass, or any outstanding questions, definitely give us an email. What is it?
It's a podcast at lakeworthbaptist.org. You can also drop us a line on Facebook or Instagram at lwbc.publications. But feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to. If we get a question that we can't answer between the two of us, we have immense numbers of resources that we can tap into and get some biblical answers for you. Just let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, we'll definitely find someone who knows what they're talking about, or sounds like they know what they're talking about.
For sure.
One of those two things. But no, we appreciate you guys listening to another installment of Thinking Well. We definitely took a plunge this week. And maybe what we'll do, Tom, is maybe we'll make it on Instagram or Facebook. Maybe we'll throw up some pictures of some of those structures out in space that I was talking about, and just so you guys can see what I was kind of referencing. But I think that might be a good depiction there. But we appreciate you guys staying tuned for another episode, and we'll be back next week with another installment. Thanks, everybody.